Yeah, so the question was about Wyoming and what's going on over there. So anybody here familiar with what's going on in Wyoming? A little bit, kind of. Just at a high level, the state of Wyoming has sort of opened the doors to crypto and blockchain at large. They are, in essence, creating their own sandbox and really welcoming a bunch of companies in to Wyoming. So you have to relocate to Wyoming, or at least put a good faith effort to have your operations in Wyoming. Yeah, we've heard Nevada as well, although Nevada has recently talked about the ULC. So I like that, but let's keep an eye and make sure they don't go down that path and have something that looks like that. But yeah, Wyoming is definitely open for crypto business. They put a lot of effort into that. There's some good folks up there like Caitlin Long, who we're friends with at our firm, does a fantastic job lobbying on behalf of the crypto space, has really worked closely with politicians up there. It's my understanding she worked for George Bush Sr.'s administration way back when as an intern, and is very familiar with the political process and has been quite successful in the state of Wyoming. So we appreciate her efforts. And yeah, definitely, if we don't want anybody here to leave California, but if you really had to find another state, Wyoming is certainly open for business for crypto and blockchain. What's the definition of money laundering and how frequently does it change? I don't think the definition necessarily changes. Basically, simply speaking, money laundering is a process of making dirty money appear clean, right? So if you're a criminal and your motive, pure motive is profit. You know, there are crimes of passion and other criminal activities, but for the most part, criminal activities, why else commit the crime? There's an economic motive. Well, you now have money that's tied to that illegal activity. You have to distance yourself as a criminal from those illicit proceeds and from the underlying activity, right? And so the way in which you would do that is you would launder the money to make the funds appear that they are clean, right? And so the goal for those in this space is to identify that potential money laundering, report it to the government. Now they have the ability to go in and investigate those crimes, right? So hit them where it counts, hit them in the wallet, right? We hear that all the time. Follow the money, right? Those types of things. That's where that comes down. If you are selling cannabis, even if you're a licensed cannabis in the state of California or any state in which it is legalized, you are still committing a federal crime. Under the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, that is a federal crime, right? And so the banks and all these financial institutions have a duty to report you to the government. Now FinCEN, and this is interesting if we want to go down the marijuana rabbit hole here, FinCEN has said, okay, we hear from a bunch of banks, what are we going to do? You know, we have this weed money, it's legal, it's not legal, what are we going to do? And so FinCEN actually came up with guidance specific to filing suspicious activity reports for marijuana companies. And they came up with unique distinctions. And they said, okay, if you do business with them, it doesn't matter what the state says because this is a federal crime. And you have a duty to report criminal activity. You have to file a SAR. And so they came up with specially formatted SARs with what you have to write in the narrative. Marijuana limited, marijuana terminated, there's different sort of designations, and then you have to relay that activity. So it's still technically money laundering. So FinCEN was able to, in my opinion, I think they did a pretty good job, right? What were they supposed to do? It's a federal crime, their hands are tied, but at the same time, now who's going to bank all these entities? And so FinCEN said, okay, we'll give you a carve out, you got to report it, but at the same time, we kind of understand that you're banking them. So it's a very weird relationship, a very weird dynamic. But our opinion is FinCEN is using the SARs to kind of get some intelligence about where the funds are in the cannabis space, figure out what things are going on. You're right, they're a little tax for resources, they're not going to go after that. Our conversations with Homeland Security and agents in the field, they don't want to touch licensed cannabis. Not because of any pro-drug policy or anything like that. They don't want to touch it because of all the lawyers involved, the cross legislation, state versus federal, and then they have to go explain to their U.S. attorney who's going to prosecute this, hey, look what we caught. And then the U.S. attorney is going to go, oh shit, I got to explain this to how many congressmen, how many senators are going to call me, how many governors are going to call me if I start to prosecute or if I start to some way go after. Now they're not going to hesitate to go after rogue individuals that aren't registered, aren't licensed in the cannabis space, and we're already seeing that, especially with CBD, where some of the states are really cracking the whip and going after these folks that are unregulated, and they're definitely not in the gray area, they're in the black market, and rightfully so. But when it comes to dispensaries and things like that, the agents that we talk to are like, yeah, we got other things to do. We're catching bad guys, and it's like, oh, okay. So it's a very interesting and odd dynamic And there's a lot of politics, I suspect, behind the scenes that I personally don't want to know about, but I suspect they're influencing that. Yeah, so the question was, are banks critical of, or what are their stances on cryptocurrencies? That I have you correct? Yeah. So it's very difficult to get a bank account if you have a crypto company. Very, very difficult to get a bank account. It's even more difficult to keep that bank account. As a matter of fact, the clients that we have helped to get bank accounts, and we can't guarantee that, of course, but those that have gotten bank accounts, as soon as they get a bank account, the 24-hour rule. They celebrate for 24 hours, they're off to find the next bank account because they're worried that as soon as that one gets shut down, they need a backup plan, right? So they're immediately going out and finding the next bank. I wish that was funny in some way, but it's not. The banks they will not hesitate to close down an account if there's cryptocurrency. Our conversations directly and indirectly with FinCEN have said they get a lot of SARs, a disproportionate number of suspicious activity reports about crypto. Most of them are fucking garbage. Most of them are garbage. There are a bunch of banks saying, oh, someone's dealing in crypto, they're unlicensed. Well, they're in Illinois, dumbass. They don't need a license, so why are you sending a SAR, right? So there's definitely a lot of issues with that. And keeping the bank account from the bank standpoint, I'll put one in there for the banks on their defense. They have very strong policies against onboarding customers. And so if you are in a high risk type of business, which traditional money transmission is high business, now you add crypto on top of that, they have a whole checklist. They have to go do site visit, background on all the officers, all this deep dive search that costs them a lot of money from a compliance standpoint. They're not going to be able to make that back on fees, right? So banks aren't nonprofits, right? They're trying to make money on fees. And so they can't make the economics of this work. Again, I think banks have a lot of work to do, but I will say that in their defense, they can't make the economics work. And so for them, it's like, well, a high-risk customer, no chance we're going to make any profit. What would you do, right? And I think that's what the banks have said. No, cryptocurrency, walking away. I don't think that they get together and say, ooh, let's see if we can really get those crypto guys by not banking them. I really think it's just their strong compliance program. Yeah, cost analysis, exactly. They painted themselves into a corner with their current policies, and this is just untenable. The question was about range of regulatory costs for starting a crypto business. Well, if you start crypto mining, there's no regulation, so you could do that. So yeah, zero, but if you want to go up there and to start an exchange, and you have to get a license in every state except for Montana, and then now, of course, Wyoming with their sandbox, if you go through that process, we've heard anywhere from $500,000 to $1.5 million for all those state licenses. That including fees, lawyer time. It's a little murky because it's hard to estimate. Well, firm A says this, firm B says that. But when you add up all the license costs, which are non-refundable, by the way, so good luck, and all the other things that you have to collect, which are typically on you, the prospective licensee, you got to pay for your background check, you got to pay for your analysis of financials and all this other stuff that you're bringing to them, and usually through an attorney, especially in states like New York and Washington where there's a process. So yeah, you're easily looking into the millions if you want to start an exchange and be in all the states. But if you want to be a Bitcoin ATM, so the question we get a lot is why there's so many Bitcoin ATMs? Well, why? Because an ATM can only be in one state at a time, right? It can only stand in one state. And so what these guys do, their operators, they go around and they look for these states, right? So Illinois, you don't need a state money transmitter license. That's why there's ATMs on every street corner. Well, not every street corner, maybe one day, I hope. That's why there's so many Bitcoin ATMs in no action and pro-Bitcoin states, because that whole barrier to entry is gone. No state money transmitter license. Sure, Joe, I'll register with FinCEN. Help me out with an AML program. That's great. Okay, I got a compliance guy that's going to do this. We're all set over here. I don't have to wait in line for 6 to 9 months for a license and hope that my non-refundable deposit is cashed and I end up getting a license at the end of that rainbow, right? So that's why you're seeing so many people getting involved in the ATMs, plus the hardware costs, the software costs, anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 for a basic machine. You want all the bells and whistles. You want to go to the guys at Genesis and talk to Gabe and Evan, get a $12,000 machine at the high end. So that's pretty doable. Okay, so the question was about using tools like Chainalysis. So is anybody here familiar with Chainalysis, Elliptic? So for those that are not, it's a blockchain forensics or a blockchain analysis company. What that software allows you to do is take the record of the blockchain, which we all know is public, and really synthesize some data and put some risk metrics behind it, right? In some cases, identify red flags like, hey, this coin was tied to the darknet, or this customer has a high risk score, you probably shouldn't do business with them. So your question about where does that apply to our clients, we actually write it in our AML program that they need to use that. And we'd started doing that a while ago, and what we noticed, the feedback that we received from the liquidity providers of the Bitcoin ATM operators is they're starting to require that the ATM operators and the others in the space that go to them for liquidity have that into their AML program. So really the industry has been driving that top down in terms of that being an expectation. Today's gimmick is tomorrow's expectation, right, in compliance. It holds true in traditional compliance, it holds true in crypto compliance. So there's a lot of pressure on the space to start utilizing those services. That said, they can be very expensive, and the crypto ATM companies have razor-thin margins, so that dynamic is a little uncomfortable. So many of them use some of the free services like blockchain.info or BlockCypher, where you're not going to get the fancy dashboard and the risk scores and the colors and everything like that, but you can see some trends and see some issues and maybe say, hey, you know what, I'm going to blacklist that customer, too rich for my blood. There's some issues with that, with those funds. So yeah, we're definitely seeing that pressure. I think as the technology gets better and the price goes down, the regulators are going to say, oh, you don't use one of these blockchain analytics tools? I can tell you the government's using them. The question was a request for me to speculate, which I love to do as a consultant, about the future of regulation and where we see it, maybe years from now and even decades from now. I really don't see much changing from the architecture here, but sort of the nuances will change. I think we're going to have very few no-action states, probably about 3 or 4 years from now, next to there's going to be no-action states. There's going to be very few no-action states. They're either going to be in one of these two categories that I've created, right? They're either going to have some sort of pro-Bitcoin exception, or they're going to say, hey, you know what? Stand in line like everybody else and get a money transmitter license. I think the no action was sort of like a little marker on the board. Hey, we'll get back to you. We're just putting a little pause there. So I think this is going to work itself out. Hopefully not like this with AB 1489, but that's what I see as kind of like the here and now in the future. As far as the other agencies, I really don't see them budging. I mean, the SEC says for purposes, or based on facts and circumstances, it could be a security. Securities laws go back to what, the 1930s, right? That's how long they've been on the books. What the government does is they create a bunch of case law and they fill that in. So they don't have to update a 1930s legislation. Commodities, I think, is fairly similar in how far back it traces its roots. Property as a tax destination might be, what, old as time? That's pretty darn old, right? So the government doesn't need to create any new laws, right? They're just applying the round peg to the square hole. And they're saying, well, you kind of fit into these things close enough, and then they're going to jam it through with case law. So that's just the common approach. But yeah, I see more activity at the state level versus anything else, and we'll see how state examinations go.